me, all right. One man believed that he, and perhaps he alone, deserved the title of mind reader, inasmuch as he could sometimes tell what he was thinking. A man asked a biscuit. I believe that's supposed to be mystic. Oh. If everyone in the world was suddenly more conscious and realized what existence is actually all about, would the life of man as we know it continue? Another historical view of the struggle. The people presented their grievances. The king ignored them. The people pressed their concerns. And the king told them that everything would be all right. The people went home and things weren't. And they complained again, and the king ignored them. They complained louder, and the king assured them that everything would be corrected to their liking shortly, very shortly. So they returned home once more, and nothing changed. Now the people grew truly inflamed and threatened the king, in response to which he slew them all while making note that they should have taken his word for it in the first place. In another area, you might care to learn that the very first physician to perform a total post-mortem exploration of the human anatomy, once inside, found a previously unsuspected nerve bundle connecting the people to the king. I mean, several divergent organs together. Conversation twixt two guys. There's one thing that stands between a man and him being something else. Himself? That's what those with a bit of sophistication are always given to proffer, while the more simplistic will say circumstances. But both miss the fat man. What really stands between a man and him being something else is simply life itself. Life as it is presently arranged locally, and the life into which you, dear boy, were born. And the second guy was really delighted to have this new information and really made good use of it from then on. Well, I say that, this being a bit of fiction and all. Knowing a trick won't do you any good unless you want to do the trick. Local reality asked one man, "How does it feel to have spent most of your life involved with this thing?" And he replied, "I done told you before, I don't do questions, and especially about death." Another way to tell that you're yet to understand what's going on is if you still try to hold on to some philosophy of life. Snippets overheard on the midway. I'll be doing all the parts. I'll be doing all the snips. Man's thoughts are like a hunter who is also his own game. Daddy, is this why mystics shoot themselves in the foot? Yes, my boy, over and over and over again until the damn thing falls off. Daddy? Yes? I reckon again that we're not really talking about what we seem to be. Our thoughts. Yes, indeedy, man's thoughts. Why, you just gotta love them. I'm here to tell you, you just gotta love them. Either that or the sons of bitches will eat you alive. Daddy? Yes? Can I have some cotton candy? Only if you promise not to confuse it with your mind again. Now I'm back to just playing the one part. In the world of the alert, there is no originality without spontaneity. Once the beginning mystic realizes what the challenge truly is, he no longer needs the various forms of human entertainment normally used to help distract the mind. I repeat, once those trying to extend their consciousness realize what the immediate impediment is, they sure as hell no longer have to go looking for something to assist their attention's out-of-control ramblings. Why, just the money saved in that portion of your discretionary income is good enough reason to be pressing the mystical path. Tonight's understatement award goes to the source of the following quote. Man actually knows more about himself than he thinks he does. The weightlifter tensed his muscles as he struck a bulging pose for the visiting philosopher, who responded by saying, "Do that with your mind and I'll be impressed." The flight to entertainment and the matter of finding the right gate. Those who don't actually want to go anywhere are given to locating travel agents who don't know where to send them anyway. Attention, now departing from Concourse C, Flight 324 to the beautiful islands of perfect justice and status quo, which does not require that any passenger leave home. We will now begin pre-boarding for the weak, the dotty, and the extremely angry. There are two kinds of medication. I believe that's supposed to be meditation. The sitting around in seclusion kind and the walking around in everyday life kind. And one continues to be much more popular than the other due to the fact that even if it accomplishes nothing, the special effort involved seems to make up for it. Think about it. Things certainly would be simpler if the distance between a man and an extended state of consciousness was spatial. The importance of reality and local conditions. The prime distinction between man and animals is that animals have none. See, you got to refer back to the title, The Importance of Reality and Local Conditions. The prime distinction being between man and animals being that animals have none. A boy asked a mystic, if we had no sense of a reality, what would man's life be like? And the mystic replied, now it'd be hard to say. And more than that, it'd be impossible to say, since man wouldn't be able to speak. And this gave the guy something to think about regarding the nexus between what men normally say is real and what's not, and the ability to say itself. Most people's tongues don't want to fool around with such matters, not to mention their minds. And now from our newsroom, this late-breaking update to a story that we have been following for you. One man says that after careful study of the videotape and consideration of that controversial explanation, he has come to the conclusion that after the one-word theory, what can you say? We will continue to track this most important story for you, at least as long as our routine babbling minds will hold up under the strain thereof. Now let's go on to some sports or weather or hog prices or something. The only way you can take life seriously is to mistake reality for life. Warning, mushy hearing alert, mushy hearing alert. Please repeat, repeat, please repeat. The only way you can take life seriously is to mistake reality for life. One mystic whose comments sometimes seemed pointed and barbed noted, I only don't like what life don't like. One reason man has a mind is so he can make plans, and by so doing give the impression that he's not as dumb as he is. Life has no long-range dislikes. That which it finds unacceptable, it dispenses with in pretty short order, by its standards at least. You could look upon the awakening as your second chance to see life clearly and directly, or your first if you consider that your original sighting occurred simultaneously with the startup of your intellect, so that what you momentarily glimpsed was already filtered and distorted fragments of reality as perceived by the mind, and not life. In regard to that great mystical struggle, one man asked a local representative of life how much it was going to cost, and the rep gave him an estimate. And the man said he wanted the actual cost, not an estimate, and was told, in this kind of matter, there are no such things as cost. Everything's an estimate. Has anybody ever heard the word allegory, metaphor? I have. Those who know must use metaphors when they speak, because if they describe things simply as they are, the ordinary would find it too fantastic to believe. Thus did one man ask himself, well, even if I stop taking reality seriously, how will I ever get my mind to? Man's hearing was the original machinery used to decipher codes, and is still the best, I might add. As he lay on his deathbed, a mystic looked up and said, life is alive. And before his followers could ask for more, his eyes closed and he was gone. As they stood there, shocked and dismayed that the words, life is alive, was all he'd left them as his dying message, they suddenly remembered that that was all he'd ever told them when he was alive. And finally, reality, what is it? Reality is life's camouflage. Reality is life's way of making you think. Reality is life rendered sociable. Reality is life made verbal, life made describable. Reality is life's way of making you take it seriously. Reality is life's way of making you whine. Reality is life in fragmented clothing. Reality is life's way of protecting itself from too much scrutiny. Reality is life on call. Reality is life's evil twin. And finally, reality is life in drag. Another, something I was going to point out along lines that I know we have done before, but sort of, but to point out in a particular way where the theory meets the facts, where the sea meets the land, where the shit meets the fan. I was going to use one of the items and pull out what occurs in ordinary life, but not on the basis that ordinary life is wrong. And the initial presentation will sound like, again, a commentary on how gosh darn difficult it is to ever do this kind of thing. In fact, how just downright gosh darn difficult it is to ever get your finger in the crack, to ever see what the hell's going on. Just gosh darn it. But that's not the problem. Somebody should know by now. The problem of getting your finger in the crack or being able to define what would seem to be ordinarily available in life and something non-available, if you got any wits by now, you've got to abandon, at least on a good day, a whole lot of looking out there to find out where the division is, to find out how to separate the wheat from the fat man, the chaff from the dandruff, whatever it is. Because there's nowhere to look out there. There's no danger if you got any wits about you. There's no danger of you. Well, when I say wits about you, we'll assume it's someone wired up to want to do something extraordinary with themselves and have grown into it a bit, know a little bit. Then by now, then you've got to understand that ordinary life is not the enemy. You've got to understand or have a grave suspicion. Again, on good days, everyone tends to forget. Why is that? You don't know. Everyone tends to forget. But on good days, you know that ordinary life is not the enemy. You also know that ordinary life does not have information available to help. But most of you should have some idea on a real, real good day, or maybe just a passing moment when you're inexplicably sort of on all fours. As they say in the law, that doesn't have anything to do with deviant sex practices or being an animal. Or maybe it does, I don't know. But you should also have some momentary, spasmodic, periodic, ephemeral, passing suspicion that you can't, not only does life have nothing available to help, but that you're not going to be captivated by some fake mystical school that, in fact, you wish, sometimes on a half-ass good day, a little side trek here, sort of a joke to themselves, I would suggest that some mystics have thought, after they understood that they couldn't be bamboozled and seduced by some fake mystical school, that sort of as a joke to themselves sometimes they think, God, that's a shame. Well, little things. You got to remember the guy that changed his name. Those of you that, which man to no one who got anything out of that news item recently, the man who had named the two sides of his brain, Cornwally Del Franco and where the hell it was. But when he combined them and pointed out that any step, no matter how small, toward increased clarity was in order. That does have some pertinence to me saying that a mystic could, just as a private joke, I probably shouldn't even say it out loud, but it doesn't matter, would think, it is a shame that I couldn't be bamboozled and seduced by just some good, I'm talking about some really up to speed, one of these good fake cults. Well, one of these fake schools. That people are really into something. Chanting and learning how to levitate or stand on their head or talk to the gods or something. People, there's something going on, damn it. And a building fund to which to contribute. And they think, well, there's no chance of that happening to me, but then the kind of joke to himself is kind of like, well, maybe I acted too hastily. It's a shame I couldn't have got involved with that, because at least I'd have somewhere to go every night. Of course, the deeper joke is then at least, besides my mirror in the bathroom, I'd be around people dumber than I am. I was going to give you an example, and maybe this will turn out to be the supreme kind of example that I've tried to get you to consider things going on in life and things that are so obvious and yet not true, not operationally functional, if you can see past reality. Me splitting up again that there is life, which no one but an idiot would describe, and anybody who describes life is describing reality. But that there are two things going on. One of the news items tonight said one way to tell for sure that you still do not know what's going on is that you continue to you try to cling to some philosophy of life. Now, at every ordinary level, having a philosophy of life is almost a prerequisite to be sane. It is certainly an absolute minimal demand to pass for being intelligent, to be insightful, or to carry it a bit further, to even be spiritually inclined. That is, there's nothing wrong, to say the least, to start with, for an ordinary person to have a philosophy of life. It's really an attempt to, because those who actually do try to be fanatics. Everyone else is attempting to. But, well, scratch the butt. Wait a minute, before I get to the butt, figuratively speaking. Delete the butt for a second. Having a philosophy of life is synonymous with being civilized. Religion has normally played the role, but philosophy can. Allegiance to a political party, but somewhere between religion and philosophy or political philosophy, you have got, and community morality, but they normally codified under some name. But in that is the active synonym for civilization. That is, all normal people they attempt to have some philosophy of life. If nothing else, they'll fall back on nationalism, but still most of the world, if interviewed, last I heard, most of the world will claim to be religious. The majority of people say, yes, I am religious. And no one but fools and fanatics claim much more than that, but they will, if pushed, and if asked to think about it, or if they're forced to apparently reflect on it themselves due to some brush with death or through some tragedy in their life, they will fall back on the thing that, well, we're not alone, or surely death's not it after their mother or father dies, that there is some philosophy of life. Now, I'm using philosophy of life with absolutely no negative connotation to it when I describe it. The philosophy of life always seems to, it's also reflected in the institutions, as I continue to point out, if you don't see the connection, but a philosophy of life always seems to be like something greater than the individual. It seems to be a philosophy, it seems to be wisdom that is larger than the individual. It is one sheep following the whole flock over wherever they're going. It is birds flying. And even ornithologist with a tenor sax cannot figure out how it is that birds are going, hundreds and thousands, and they all go suddenly. Nobody can hear any signal. The head bird out in front, doesn't do anything. They just all go. That's it. It's a philosophy of life, except theirs is unstated. Humans, if they're sane, if they're ordinary, and it's got nothing to do with intelligence, as I indicated, in fact, the more intelligent you are, the more it's expected that you profess some philosophy of life. It is the unspoken belief that a wisdom, any wisdom worth following, comes from without the person. And it must be wide. No one analyzes this, obviously, or surely you recognize, but it must come from without them, that is, outside of them, and it must be of widely held value, and it's never questioned, nor should it be. Do you understand? To be civilized, you should, if you are not part of it, all good mystics, as I pointed out, they should be in favor of as many people on this planet having a philosophy of life. And a good mystic, anybody who understands life, does not give one small goddamn what philosophy. You don't care whether they're Jews, Christians, socialists, anything that's not dangerous to society, you want them to be that way. In fact, just this side of fanatical. You never want fanatical, because then you got problems in life. We'll finally dispatch them as a short-range dislike. I know sometimes it seems like fanatics pop up and they last a dozen years, and people think, how did we ever get through? Or some country thinks, how did we ever live through the tyrannical rule of so-and-so? It happened 10 years. I'm not trying to take up for the situation, but you've got to understand 10 years in relationship to lifespan, just up till now. And who knows how long he's going to live. Life dispatches fanatics, but you should be in favor of everyone being within a hair's breadth of fanatically devoted to some philosophy of life. And again, I'm referring to a philosophy of life that is not destructive, remember. It's just whatever they call it. Any religion, just the humanist theory, whatever it is, you should be all in favor of it. But now, you cannot think, there is no gray area. You cannot have a philosophy of life, or to the degree that you still fall back, that you attempt to cling to some philosophy of life. And I don't care how sweet it sounds, how sweet it smells when you feel like your foot's 1 inch closer to the grave, or when your finances seem to be pulling a Houdini. If you fall back on a philosophy of life, even if it can appear to be something you picked up from some apparent past metaphysical structure or some mystical organization, or it could be that you think now that maybe you have stirred up your own individual gumbo of it, that you've taken a little from Sufism, a little from Zen, and 2 or 3 sentences, and these ideas sort of pop in your head whenever you seem to be confronted with the trials and tribulations of everyday life, and yet you have enough momentary wherewithal to sort of, you try to resist it, and it's like you try to think of proverbs, you try to think of witty, mystical sayings to sort of ward off. You use it like a talisman, like when you're going to hold up a cross to a vampire. And it all seems, no one's ever questioned this, but life, well, it's my job. No one's ever pointed it out to try and make people question it. To the degree that you try to cling to any philosophy of life, any, did you say any philosophy of life, you are absolutely standing still to be charitable. You are certainly not doing anything resembling being conscious. But now look, it's not an attack on that, because look, the ordinary world is run by that. That's why I spent the first part of it, that you cannot speak too highly, just to be silly about it, you cannot speak too highly of others clinging to, searching for a philosophy of life. Whenever you hear political observers, social observers, or anyone decrying the crumbling state of morality in any country, any area, and they start trying to come up with plans and set up a committee to study it, then they come up with things like, well, we need to increase, we need to distribute the wealth. Nobody knows what to do, so they always say, well, we got to take the poor, because that's where the crime and the nipping at the heels of society comes from. We got to give the poor more money, and we got to take the uneducated and educate them. And everybody keeps rediscovering that. Life takes care of itself. But the point is, when they even describe it in other terms, what they're saying is to make these people more civilized. Bring them into the mainstream. That the only reason that they are antisocial, the only reason that they're criminal, is because they're not in the mainstream. Which is a fair description. But then they're left with, well, how do we get them in here? Because the people in there don't know how they got there. It's just it's just the old story of life out there. It's just a bunch of bullshit. But you're supposed to take it seriously if you're out there. And so they have to come up with it. But what I'm trying to get you to see is all descriptions. They can say, well, maybe we should set up social clubs over in the poor neighborhoods, the crime-ridden areas of the world. Clubs to encourage, Boy Scouts, Girls Club of America. Try to get churches to go out and put some outreach program there. We don't care what kind of church. Do you understand that all of it is what they're attempting to do is give them a philosophy of life? And they'll say anything but that. Life is not prepared for people to put it that directly. But when they're saying that we have got to do something about the criminal element, and I'm using that in the full sense, that is, people who are a danger to society. They're at the fringes of the healthy core of the parade. They're at the fringes of the healthy genetic core of humanity, to be plain about it. But it's an old story. It's nothing new. But every description they come up with, every possibility, what they're saying is, if we could give them a philosophy of life. You mean like a hand gesture? Well, there's no need to be. Well, there could be a reason. Yeah, but you didn't have to. Oh, okay. So you guys are getting so good, I don't have to finish the sentences, right? They are attempting to give them a philosophy of life. And whether it be called a Buddhist, a Chinese, an Indian, a Hindu, a Catholic, a Norwegian, whatever it is, a philosophy. What they're attempting to do is to give them something that they will rely on other than their feral, almost non-existent, just minimally functioning intellect. Because that's what it is. That they are living closer to the old survival level than the intellectual level. They're always there. Life takes care of itself. It just seems frightening if you live there. But what I'm wanting you to see is that even those who are already, that are genetically born into the healthy core of humanity, right in the middle of the middle class and the mainstream, they grow into it. They're just there. They grow with a philosophy of life. And it doesn't matter what it is. The point being, they grow up civilized. They grow up with a greater dependence on this, generally speaking, than on this. Out in the street, you might say, when it really comes push to shove, the presidents of large corporations, rabbis, priests, ministers, politicians, if it's out in public, the mainstream of society, when push comes to shove, they, as a rule, will have their intellect override their survival instincts within reason. That a priest, even if he can't quit hating somebody in his heart, as a rule, if somebody comes up on the street and says, I hate the church, I hate religion, and just pushes a guy, so what are you going to do about it? Then the priest will generally walk away. You hope he will. That is civilization. That's what it is. That's what that represents. He is acting the archetypical type of civilized man, and less civilized men come up to him, a murderer, or somebody just comes up and says, looks at him and says, you're in religion, I hate religion, and pushes him or shoves him. What are you going to do about it? Civilization, as long as it can protect itself, is supposed to walk away. And it doesn't matter if later somebody comes up to the civilization, or the priest, if you want a personal and says, how can you do that when somebody insults your whole life and the way they talked about you and religion? How can you do that? What he's got to rely on, as far as he's concerned, and civilization in toto, but what he feels like he is relying on is like, well, the person can say, didn't you want to push him back? Didn't you want to, at least say you shouldn't talk? Didn't you want to return a little of the anger? Well, yeah, but I'm a priest, and the philosophy I try to live by is that of Christian charity. It could have been anything. But that is civilization in action. That is the individual in action. An ordinary person, and you've all got them in you, so you ought to be able to hear this now when I start on it. At every ordinary level, the mind And it does not matter how educated you are, how civilized you are, if you're just working by the mind feels absolutely, unconditionally unqualified to do what it does. It absolutely does. The obvious I've tried to sort of poke fun at for the last 2 or 3 weeks to build up to this about education and getting degrees. It can sound like a smart-ass comment, but it's reality. That's one reason they must issue degrees. Because you don't know what you're doing. The institution didn't know what they were teaching. Now we're talking about now we've upped the stakes. We're not talking about out there in the level of reality, because out there it doesn't matter. It's cannibalism. It's a merry-go-round. It's reality eating itself, throwing up, and somebody else eats it, and it throws up again. Everybody keeps discovering how we can get by. How you get by is you don't have to do anything. But that is what happens in education in a sense, and that's how people become experts. That's why you want to, not just to pick on the experts. That's why, if you're ordinary, you seek out the services of an expert. Since you know that nobody knows what they're doing, at least you'd like for an expert not to know. And he charges more. It's all a form, if you'd like to I'll make up a new term. It's all a form of, like the rationale of ignorance based upon semi-recognized masochism. That is, since you know that no one knows what they're doing, and you seem to have these mental problems, and you find out a priest will talk to you for free. Well, maybe you try it once or twice, and you realize he can't help you. Then you find out that psychiatrists get $200 an hour, and you feel like, well, okay, I'm going to have to give up my idea of a new car. I'll have to get a second job. But it's important to get help. And when you actually need help, you need expert help. That's on the basis that everyone knows that no one else knows what they're doing. But at least the priest will talk to you for free. No wonder it doesn't work. It's the acknowledgement, the silent recognition of ignorance, camouflaged with a certain degree of masochism. That if it hurts me to pay, even though I know nothing's going to happen, it's like something will happen. There was a news item tonight that I didn't pull out for those of you that I pointed out there were two kinds of meditation. The sitting in seclusion kind and the walking around everyday kind. And that one of them is always and still continues to be much more popular than the other. Even though if it doesn't work, if it doesn't accomplish anything, at least it seems like that the effort involved for you to go do it made up for it. Same thing. That out here comes, get ready now. Don't let it blind you. Out there in the ordinary world. I was afraid the gesture might frighten some of you. But out there in just the ordinary run of city level consciousness, the world of reality, life looks out after it totally, just like any good shepherd would its sheep. But everyone knows at a genetic silent level that no one knows what's going on. And thus it grows up the idea of experts, the idea of education, and at a somewhat wider range, even the idea that education per se, just education itself, will increase one's civility, will increase the use to which one might be to society in general. All attempts to reform man, all attempts to exercise any remediality on people is all based upon trying to instill in them some philosophy of life. Outside the area of the clerical would be the government, trying to instill in people and children and aspects of society that they say are outside the mainstream. Criminals, dope dealers, people that just won't play right, just people who are always a danger. If nothing else, if we can't get them enticed to being true to their family and having some kind of community morals, or if they won't be religious, it's kind of the last step, is like if we can make them have some sense of patriotism. If we can make them feel as though it's their benefit to be part of the main herd, which it is, of course, from the main herd's view. Well, life makes everyone look after the herd. And so then the herd is protecting itself. then the more civil you are. It's another proof I point out, the more you will turn to those who are a threat, who are a danger, who are outside actual help, but you can't admit it. One proof of the degree to which you are civilized is that you look at the retro, those who are retro, and you cannot say, well, these people are retro. You cannot do that. Life makes men continue to say, well, we've got to bring everyone in the mainstream, we've got to help everyone, we've got to pull them up. But you got to remember, well, you don't got to remember. What was I saying? The heart, the middle class are going to look after themselves. Life makes sure of that. But then it makes them also say that they want to help those outside the mainstream so as to better protect the mainstream. That it seems to be in everyone's interest. But what are they attempting to do? Oh, that's not the main point. It's back to the philosophy of life. That the banner under which all civilization, all decency, all technical progress, everything out in the, are you ready? Ordinary world of reality, everything out there that is decent, wholesome, passable, tolerable, everything out there that's not yucky and dangerous, everything out there is based on a philosophy of life. That's what holds it together. But now individually, your mind, all you got to do is check back with you, I'll talk about other people. The mind, when you start out and for a long time, the mind is wired in such a way that it's wired up to everyone else's consciousness. It is that level that I've drawn a diagram of. It's like running through here, and it's up 6 feet off the planet more or less, and it's like a level, it's an atmosphere, and it's the collective consciousness of everybody. And everyone's tied to it. You're born into it the same way genetically you're born into the species of Homo sapien. You are born into this collective consciousness. The mind at that level is incapable. It's just one of these obvious things. You either see it or you don't. And if you don't, it's obvious. That's proof then of you're right back where you were, right where you started, that you see that the mind is incapable, physically, technically, literally, is incapable of what men call thinking. You don't think. Humanity thinks. And part of the way that you get by, part of the illusion that people can think is whatever humanity is thinking. Which, you got to remember, everything that ever been thought, humanity has already thought it. So, whatever they're thinking, and it does you no good, follow the sentence, I'll get through in a minute. It does no good for them to say, well, wait a minute, which part? It doesn't matter what part. Whatever humanity has been thinking, it doesn't matter whether you agree, whether you disagree, but having the ability to disagree is what gives the illusion that you have some individual powers of reflection, of thought. Because there you stand, listening to someone speak, listening to the president, some important person or anybody speak. They can even say the president speaks for this wonderful nation of ours. And he says something about none of us are going to stand idly by. No decent American is going to stand idly by and watch people less fortunate than him, especially children and women, go without. No good American's going to. And you could say, well, that may be true in the charitable sense, but I'm not going to listen to some damn Democrat say that. They just want to raise taxes. In other words, it sounds as though you heard a philosophy expressed that tried to take in under the complete umbrella billions and millions, hundreds of millions of people, and some spokesman, some head alpha male wolf, says here is what all good Americans feel like. And let's say that almost all of them that heard him go, yes, that's true. But you could go, well, wait a minute. I'm not sure I agree with that. And right there is the illusion, the sensation. I don't mean illusion as though it doesn't exist, but it is the absolute sensation that you are capable of some original thought, individual thought, because of the fact that you can naysay what you heard. You can disagree with it. Most people can never get past that, even talking about it, because they can hear that. That's obvious. They go, well, yeah, I can disagree with stuff. And then they won't go, but a whole bunch of it you should. And you try to say, if I was talking to somebody, put all this in you, of you talking to your mind, and you go, wait a minute, I didn't say anything about that. And that just makes the mind almost want to shut down. Because you told the mind, just disagreeing with what you hear is not any evidence. None. It's just foolish to call that any kind of evidence that you're capable of individual thought. And the mind goes, but I disagreed. You go, but what did you disagree with? You disagreed with what was going on. And if you stand there long enough inside this web, sooner or later, it could be within minutes and days, within your lifetime, that same idea will be expressed somewhere. So the president, somebody, tugs this whole network, and one time it tugs, and for whatever reason, maybe it's something you ate. And you go, I don't know, nah. And you kind of pull away this way. Remember, you connected right here with 6 billion other people, which is the complexity of every narrowing down one example and making it proof, because there is no such thing. See, that would be the cost. The guy asked, what's the cost of understanding? And he asked local reality, and it gave him an estimate. And the man said, I don't want no estimate. I want to know what's going to be the cost. In local conditions, who was a rep for life, said in instances like this, there is no cost. Everything's an estimate. You don't get that? All descriptions are metaphorical. All right, some of them could not be. It's possible not to, but it would take you for friggin' ever to describe one thing. In case I don't prove this night after night. Because at any given moment, whatever you think is I'll say result, which is not, because you're not the end product. But whatever you think right this second, if you're ordinary, is tied to 6 billion other tugs. Do you understand of trying to predict, even trying to understand, wait a minute, why did that guy suddenly go, screw the government? Just whatever he said, or I quit, I want to raise, whatever he said, and you think, wait a minute, let's analyze, if we could understand why one man thought one thing, we'd know it all, which, by the way, is true. Ordinary people, I assume, won't hold their breath. But if we look down, if we were playing the ordinary part, and you look down at that one guy and he hollers, screw the government, and we go, all right. Or, I hate my mother. Something that seems of significance to ordinary people. And we said, all right, wait, if we could stop the flow of everything. And we said, all right, if we could determine why this one man said that one thing, we could probably from there deduce, even induce, but the full scope of why man is as he is. Which is, all right, let's say it's true. How are you ever going to do it if you've got any conception of the complexity and the blunt simplicity of what life is, which takes another level of something, but you understand that right then, and this is as close as I'm going to fool with it, that was caused, with serious quotation marks, by what was going on with 6 billion other people tugging here and there, and none of them, including the person that he thought he was reacting to, none of them, that is the president. He's the one that says, blah, 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 and this guy goes, screw the government anyway. And you go, wait a minute. Well, at least we can narrow it down because he was reacting to what the president said. No. If you're going to do that, you might as well be a Christian or a Jew, because then you'd buy the thing, or a psychiatrist, for that matter, because then you buy the sins of the fathers are the sins of the sons. There's been many a mystic that heard that said in a church or a synagogue somewhere and went, wait a minute, I found an audience. If those people understand that, I'll go in and I will seduce them. But you go in to the people that say that, life makes them do that, You know how Jim Henson was. He make people go, the sins of the fathers are the sins of the sons. And you go, you people really believe that? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You really do. Now, you promise. You're not going to make me stand here and palaver for no reason. They go, oh, yeah. That's part of our basic philosophy of life. You go, okay. God, I've been looking for you people. Listen to me then. God, you're going to be glad to hear this. Because I got one question to get us going. Right past the Father, go back to, the Father's sins, go right back past that. And suddenly everybody goes, might as well be a science fiction movie. They may not do it physically, but if you can see life in people's eyes, they go. Because if you say, wait a minute, he only hollered screw the government because he was just reacting to the president. So we can at least got a place to start. I'm talking about an ordinary person back responding to my supposition, proposition. And me saying, or them saying, if we could understand why one guy said one thing, I mean, he passionately said, screw the government. Or, I hate my mother. And let's say he did that in response to somebody saying, trying to send him a Mother's Day card. Or, something that seems to be ordinary people take to be of significance. He goes, bah! And so we say, if I say, well, wait a minute, you'll never figure this out. And they go, well, we can narrow it down. I'm playing both parts, you know. Ordinary people say, you were talking about it was some kind of interaction or kind of, at least momentarily, result of 6 billion people pulling this thing every which way. Yeah. But we can narrow it. At least we know he was responding directly to what the president said. And that's where they got to. That is, that's where life got them, by the short hairs of the neck. It's actually the short hairs of the cerebral cortex, well, more or less. Do you understand? Because then you try to say, wait a minute. We got to find why the president said that. And then you look in their eyes and they go, that's the end of it. Life does not want people to go any further because, in one sense, if they went any further, there are two possibilities for me to put in words. One is they won't see a damn thing. But the real possibility is they might go, wait a minute. Wait a goddamn minute. And they're going to make Homer Simpson's little shtick look like nothing because they think, all my life I've been whining and crying. In other words, they'd be very close to having an experience. But you can't do that. Which is back to why ordinarily people cannot even take into consideration that whatever you're thinking at the ordinary level right this second, the best you could say, and you got to understand, I'm not trying to insinuate I'm hiding anything more specifically. At best, what you're thinking right now, you have got to consider that there were 6 billion, literally, tugs going on. Some seem to be closer, some seem to be further. The guy thought he was responding to the president. You can say it's closer, so what? Because if you're of limited ordinary intelligence, you're going to respond to local affairs anyways, trying to kick around personal anecdotes and talking about yourself to you. It's not because of ego. It's because you take that which cannot be explained and the mind wants to say, wait a minute. Yeah, they hear some discussion like this or somebody talking about the complex dynamics of how psychology and subconscious things happen to, and if somebody listens, an ordinary person, and they go, yeah, but wait a minute. All right, let me tell you what happened to me and my wife. And they're gone. And no one ever notices that. That is the excuse for not understanding anything verbally, is you always make it a personal anecdote. It doesn't matter, but it's when you're confronted with someone else's philosophy, or some theory, or some idea, some social moral or norm, and it's like something you said, and they go, wait a minute. The common belief in psychiatry today, this leading experts just told you made some comment about, well, I always thought that such and such about the way men and women got along. And they go, wait a minute, son, wait a minute. Now, we're getting to the heart of your problem. I mean, I'm glad you said that because I'm going to tell you right now, the thinking, Western psychiatry today, and there is no serious disagreement about this one thing, and we're at the heart of what you were talking about. The full spectrum, the full weight of psychiatric thought and wisdom right now, the whole history of what we've done, says that that's not true. And so that should help you. I mean, for you to know that is absolutely now rejected. And the person stands there and goes, all right, let me tell you what happened to me and my wife. And people, you're used to it, but if we were trying to play that kind of, I said like another level of irony, if we really had a super duper hero of irony, it's not to make fun of life, it's simply to point out that which life makes men say as their aims, the real irony or the funny or the sarcasm at another level is to look at what life makes them stand there seriously, all dressed up, suits and ties and degrees, and say, well, this is where we're headed. Or now that I'm prime minister, here's where we're going. Either that or just an individual guy saying, well, here's how I'm going to bring my family back together and save my marriage. And then look at it and see what degree of efficiency, to be funny, to what degree of efficiency do they make any effort to approach. Forget get there, to even make a first step toward the aim. There's just absolutely no connection directly. It's just laughable. So, no one will even call out, even the psychiatrist. And it's not just psychiatry, understand it. Somebody saying, well, your idea, what you just expressed there, sir or madam, based upon everything we know now about archaeology, everything we know about the history of Crete, everything we know about the origins of the German language, everything, whatever it is, they've caught you flat-footed. There you stand, they say, that's simply not true. No offense to you, and in fact, you should be glad for us to correct you and point out. But that is no longer, that has no validity in the scientific or the academic or our community. That is it's proven to be untrue. We all know that. And the guy stands there, and he goes, well, All right. Last week, my wife, let me tell you what she did. And no one says, wait a minute. What the hell is a personal anecdote got to do with what I told you? And nobody does. They're not supposed to, but it just goes on. It's like, well, there's a small chink. There's somebody listening to it could go, well, he's right. And I'm not saying either one's right, but here the guy spoke. Has a Nobel Prize in psychiatry. The world's leading psychiatrist. You know, with no rancor, he's just trying to, apparently, I'm just taking an outside view, an ordinary view, he's apparently trying to help this guy who's whining about his marriage falling apart in his life and all. And there's a thing there, maybe after a lecture or something, the psychiatrist, the guy makes a comment, and the psychiatrist says, well, look, I've heard that story, we've studied that, that's a classic attitude. And I'm telling you right now, I'm going to give it to you because you probably should be in treatment. I'm not trying to instantly perform analysis on you, but you should be glad to know this. Just let me tell you. And we're talking about the leading, it might as well be the mouthpiece for psychiatry. Or it could be the mouthpiece for history, education, civilization. He says, at least you should be glad to know. I'll take this time to note that what you believe. I heard you. For a long time, in fact, there were several schools, important schools of thought in psychiatry that supported you. But you'll be glad to know that now, after years of statistics and research, that what you say is not valid. That is not true. I understand you got a problem. I understand you're upset. But what you express as being the cause of it, and he's feeling like you should be thankful. You should be glad to hear it. It's not true. The guy said, all right, let me tell you what my first wife did to me. I don't have time to make the point any further. That was still what we were talking about. Life is arranged in such a way that if all you're doing, what I've been calling the mind as opposed to something else, like a non-committal kind of consciousness or consciousness sans comment, the enlightened experience, the awakening of consciousness, etc., as opposed to just the operations of your mind. And it doesn't matter what the operations of your mind are, it's got nothing to do with it. You can talk about education, you can talk about past experience. You were born, you sprouted up like a stalk of corn, you got to the point of being conscious like everyone else, as they call it, and there you were plugged into the great network. It's one of the things you just have to see that's just as plain as hell. You don't have to go to school. How you like the guy that said that he might be the only person in the world worthy of the title mind reader, because, damn it, sometimes he could almost tell what he was thinking. There's a man with a life well spent. You do not think at that level. That is, there is nothing possible. There is nothing resembling any individuality. There's no individual thought. And yet, look, what I was trying to describe to you about how things merge in such a way of theory and practice and theory and facts. The very thing that holds life together, that brought you to the point you are now, wherever you are, that brought you there, is an absolute canard. It is a farce. It is, if a man had an opponent, that's yours, is a philosophy of life. The very thing that is decent, because all philosophies of life, remember, I'm saying they're decent. We're not talking about something that was dangerous, like some fascist philosophy of life that we should kill everybody with a different color hair than us. I'm talking about a philosophy of life that is supportive, that appears to be positive, whether you're part of it or not. It is civil supporting. It is a support of civility and civilization. The very thing that brought you to this point, that makes life tolerable, and that anyone hearing this is living in relative safety and is fed and etc., that is the very thing that you cannot do. Which is a crude way of putting it. But any philosophy of life, and it can be a mystical philosophy of life, you are still tied back to the network. If that sounds complex enough, now I've tried to give you the simple version before, that one guy asked, well, what do you do with the mind? Or how about ordinary thought? I mean, they're going on. What can I do? Or how can they be used? The simplest way to consider it, I guess I should have smiled, is to consider it this way, literally, once you see it. It won't necessarily stop it, obviously, forever. But is that anything that your mind thinks is wrong, is useless, has nothing to do with ever escaping from it. Or any words you want, has nothing to do with becoming more conscious. Nothing. Ergo, all my jokes over the last year or so about guys talking to their mind, insulting their mind, and I'm not talking to you, and shut up, and all that stuff. I wasn't trying to drive you crazy, which, of course, would be a short putt in some cases. It's that there's nothing going on in a man's mind that's of any help. Did you kind of raise your voice and almost squeal when you said, any help? Yes. I thought maybe a little dramatics might help. But you sit there and your mind will say, well, that's not true. Think of all the great books you read about how to overcome your mind and become more conscious. And you in your mind go, yeah, how about that? And I have to go, oh, touchy. Or for those of you in Louisiana, touche. Let me leave it. There was a purpose. Put this in your nervous system. You battling people having a philosophy of life, if you're doing that, you make Don Quixote, like we should put him in charge of the Pentagon. It is not life playing a trick on you, and it's not society out there in a philosophy of life that's your problem. It's your mind has a philosophy of life. You can be an atheist, you can be non-patriotic, you could apparently think you can weasel out of every example I've given, but your mind taking itself seriously, its thoughts, is its philosophy of life. It's why it's damn near impossible, if you're sane, to insult your mind. I mean, in a way they'll do any good, like, you ignorant son of a bitch, and they go, you're right. That's a sign of insanity. That's why I've used outside examples also in the last few weeks, that proof of sanity is, out in the city, or at the ordinary level, is to accuse somebody of being insane, and they will, shall we say, vigorously deny it. In fact, ordinary people know that something's wrong if you tell somebody, I've been listening to you talk for a while, and I think you're crazy. And the person doesn't seem to mind. It is a valid people understand, well, hey, that you don't want to be around a person like that because they're supposed to defend the fact, no, I am sane. Of course, back to the same kind of thing that nobody's supposed to point out. Like, what's a personal anecdote got to do with a fact? Is like somebody defending their sanity, and you think, wait a minute, if you're sane, why the hell do you care about me calling you insane? Well, I just care. It's not the kind of thing I want to have, bandied around. I don't hear somebody call me insane. You think, well, if you're actually sane, what the hell do you care? Years ago, the more obvious story was the old one, a little before the sexual revolution, or in our time, is walk into a bar, and the old thing, holler, I'm going to whip everybody in here that might be homosexual. A whole bunch of guys that look like stevedores and people. Suddenly, somebody turns around and says, what did you say? You can't talk about me that way. And, of course, they go that far. Sometimes they're not sure, but they think, maybe I shouldn't have spoke up. It's just a variation of walking in the bar and say, I'm going to whip every ignorant son of a bitch in here. And you'll see a bunch of sons of bitches begin to roll up their sleeves like, hey, why does somebody have to defend their sanity? Why does somebody have to defend their expertise? Why do they have to have a diploma on the wall? Why do they have to have it? And you've been going to a psychiatrist and you say, well, I'm not a bit better off than I was. Or tell a priest, I'm not a bit better off. Do you see that? PhD in theology from Princeton. From Princeton. And you tell me you're no better off. Get out of here. Leave some money in the box. It's internal. That's what I was getting at. It's not life. It's not a battle out there. It's your mind has a philosophy of life. And its philosophy of life is, I'm okay. I'm all right. We're working on it. That is absolutely anathema. And that's not even strong enough. It's not even in the same universe as being conscious. It's not actually in the same universe as actually thinking, which is such a fine point that, it would probably even confuse Mr. Popeil. I'm not sure that. That's why I hate to talk about actually changing thinking, because then the mind goes, now we're getting somewhere. So you just have to sort of make this big, discrete jump, like, well, the mind and thought's one thing, and this is something else. Because if you give it any leeway, the mind goes, see, I told you. And then your mind say, as a matter of fact, let me tell you what happened between me and my wife. We were talking about that.